So, okay, towards the end of 2014, I basically went on this huge anime binge and tried to watch every single show that came out in 2014 to at least give it a chance, to give every show at least an episode to see how it was gonna impress me, so that at the end of the year I could make this giant top shows of the year list. It ended up being 20 shows, and I want to do the same thing for 2015. But I'm determined to give the shows a little bit more of a chance than I did in 2014, just for the sake of more confidence in what I put on my list. I know a lot of people are going to argue with it no matter what. There's always going to be people who like the shows that I don't like, and that can't be helped. And, it's funny for me because people will always say something like, 2015 is a terrible year for anime. And then all the popular shows will be the ones I didn't like, but there are nonetheless 20 shows I did like, so for me it's a great year for anime. But we'll find out what those 20 or more or less shows might be at the end of the year. Well, not the end of this year, whenever I'm done catching up with 2015 shows. I kind of put it off at the end of last year and at the beginning of this year. I was working on the Asterisk War series. I had other ambitions and other interests, and I wasn't sure how into the idea I was, but I knew I wanted to do it eventually, and I wanted to see all the shows. So I'm trying to go through some of the shows that I, unfairly or quickly dropped just because I thought they didn't look interesting, and I want to at least give them the 3-episode test to see if I, was completely justified. So far, in the last few days, doing this whole watch shows that I didn't initially like to see if they get good thing has not been going well. So far, I've just gotten farther into the show and reaffirmed all of the thoughts I had about it on the basis of the first few episodes. And honestly, I've never really seen a show that I thought got better in the way that people say. Like, every time someone says that a show gets better as it goes, what they're failing to recognize is that they made it that far. In order for you to get to the point where the show supposedly gets better, you had to have enjoyed the show enough to have not dropped it yet. Which means on a baseline, you enjoy the show more than the guy who dropped it. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there who don't drop anything, and I don't know that they necessarily have lower standards so much as they just like to finish things, whether they end up enjoying it or not. But personally, I've never had the experience of really hating a show at the start and then ending up loving it by the end. There have been plenty of shows that I didn't like the first time I saw them, but then when I watched them again later, then, I was older and had different tastes. Like, I always bring up Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex as an example where I wasn't into it when I was younger, and then I watched it now and I liked it, but I also expected to. Like, I looked at it and it seemed like my type of show now, and I was hooked from episode 1, so it wasn't like it had to win me over by watching a bunch of it. I was just like, oh, this is immediately relevant to me now. So I've yet to have that, that true winning over experience. But, there are a lot of shows that I feel like I dropped too hastily, and I want to give a second chance to. Not all of them do I think are going to be great, but some of them could at least be tolerable, or maybe even better than I expect. So I'm going to start marathoning at least the first 3 episodes of a bunch of shows that I didn't give any chance to in 2015. The first one, which I don't expect to like at all, is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon? This was the biggest show of its season, mostly on the basis of the character Hestia and her attractive character design in the eyes of some people. Yeah, I think she's cute, but not in her main outfit. I hate the boob string outfit. I have seen her in other outfits that come later in the show that looked okay. But when I first saw this show, it came on, and I was so put off by the fact that the armor that the characters wear in the main town looks exactly like the generic newbie armor from Sword Art Online. And I was like, oh my god, it's SAO all over again, which SAO is still more fresh in my mind at the time. Now, credit where it's due, because this was kind of unfair of me because I later found out that the original character designer for the novels of SAO was also the original character designer for the light novels of this show. So it's not that they were just ripping off SAO, it's literally the same character designer. So I don't think it's, unreasonable that the characters would look pretty similar. And as we all know, that character designer is the younger brother of Kaon's character designer, as I discovered in that hilarious vlog. That's not relevant, I just felt like bringing it up. But this show, I also was kind of bothered by the sort of genericness of its world, where it's just like, it's an RPG world, and the terms and everything they use are just generic RPG terms, like, it's the dungeon. Like, there's even though it's not a actual video game show, like, it just is in a world that's like a video game. It's not actually a video game. So the fact that they use these generic gaming terms was kind of weird and felt lazy to me. But I only watched like 10 minutes of episode 1, so I'm at least going to give it the 3-episode test before giving it the drop, and then we'll check out some other shows from last year. Well, my impression after episode 1 is that this show is really boring and dumb. The main character guy has no personality whatsoever. He's just a dude who falls in love with some girl in a dungeon, and he's weak and he wants to be strong so that he can date that girl. Hestia is basically just a walking pair of tits. I hate that this show has those designs. I always hate this in shows where they have the shirts that go up under the girl's tits, like they have a bra built into their shirt, and it looks so stupid all the time. Shirts don't work that way. So that drives me crazy. I also don't get why the girl who he's in love with, she has this armor plate that like goes up one of her boobs for like it's normal around the other one, but then it just goes up on the other one for no reason. What the fuck's the point of that? And just the plot is not interesting. It's just this kid wants to date this girl, and apparently he has a skill that makes him stronger, or develop faster rather, by being in love with that girl. The more he's in love with her, the more his powers develop quickly, I guess. But the ending of the episode had this, like, unbelievably corny scene where, like, that girl and her adventurers walk into the tavern where he's eating, and, like, one of the guys just, like, very specifically starts detailing how pathetic he is, and then it asks the girl, like, would you ever date someone like that? Such a weakling? Of course you wouldn't. And I was just like, what? Why would he say that? Why would he phrase it like that? Why would he ever just happen to say the exact words that way? And now there's like an after credits fan service scene. The fan service in this show is like, it's well drawn, so I get it, but like, it's the kind of thing where it's like, I could just be watching porn if I wanted to see this. If I just want to see, some girl with big titties flopping them around, then I can just go watch a show about big titties flopping around. Why sit through a light novel thing for that? But, yeah. We'll see, we'll watch another episode or two, I guess. I feel like every critic's got a cross to bear. Every critic has that one thing, that one genre, that one franchise or something that, like, that they're grappling with forever, trying to deal with. Like, there's some people who hate superhero movies or whatever, and or the state of modern adaptations of films or whatever. Everyone's got their one thing, and mine is light novels. I feel like light novels are my cross to bear. People might be thinking, why do you keep watching all these light novel adaptations when you clearly hate them and have such strong feelings about them? And it's because there was once a time when I was a huge evangelist for light novels, when light novels were great. Almost all of the light novel adaptations were awesome. When you had fucking Bakano and Spice and Wolf and fucking... Oh god, let me look at my collection real quick. And Monogatari and all these great light novels coming out all at once around the end of the last decade. Haruhi. It used to be that, like, knowing it was a light novel adaptation was like knowing it would be good. At least for me. Those were the kinds of stories I liked. And then somehow, over time, it transformed into this other thing where every fucking light novel is the exact same thing. And you know, I used to love video game video game style shows. Like, when I was a kid, I loved Dot Hack. I mean, I can't fucking stand it now, but that whole concept of being trapped in a video game is like inherently interesting. Log Horizon's the only show that ever did it right, but man, why did they all become like this? Why did they all just become these bland, boring fan service traps? What happened to light novels? You know, I kinda like Hestia's voice. She gives a very energetic, fun performance. But then there's Belle, who's Kirito. He just is Kirito, voice-wise. Well, 2 episodes was enough of that. The second half of episode 2 was fucking infuriating. I mean, I was already bored, and I was kind of lapsing in and out of consciousness towards the middle point. But, like, the idea of this episode is Hestia goes and gets this really cool knife made for the main character guy. And she's carrying it around in this, like, satchel thing on her back. And so she's like, main character guy, let's go on a date, right? And so immediately I'm like, alright, she didn't give him the knife right away, which means that it's gonna end up being that they have either some kind of misunderstanding, or they get separated in the middle of a battle and she doesn't end up giving him the knife right away. And she's only gonna give him the knife at a moment when it's most dramatically like, oh, here, now you can save the day. So they start getting attacked by this giant gorilla monster, and he's like dragging her around town. She's still not giving him the knife. She's got the knife right there. It's all she's been thinking about all day, is how she's going to give him this knife, and they're running from this gorilla. Then she gets knocked to the ground. Gorilla's reaching out to grab her, and he goes running up to slash at it, and immediately I'm like, his sword's gonna fucking break. He's gonna hit it with the sword, and the sword's gonna break, and then she's gonna give him the knife. And lo and behold, the sword breaks. She still doesn't give him the knife. All I can think this whole time is, give him the fucking knife! Just give him the knife, you fucking idiot! And then he, like, at the end of the episode, like, dramatically locks her behind these steel bars, and he's like, you run off, I'm gonna go save you. The episode ends with her all like, oh, Belcoon! And I'm like, give him the knife. Just give him the fucking knife. And guess what? He could probably kill the fucking monster. Why don't you give him the fucking knife? I can't take this kind of shit when, like, the characters are just idiots for no reason other than dramatic tension. Like, why is Hestia so fucking stupid? Why? Is there any possible reason for her to not have given him the knife other than to build up so that it's more dramatic? So fucking stupid. God. And I was already bored, like I said, so yeah, that's enough of that show. I can't take any more of that. I forgot to mention also that, I also watched 3 episodes of Etotama yesterday, because I was just curious about it, and it's a bizarre show. It's got pretty cool CG animated fight scenes that use this very different style from the rest of the show. The characters, like, turn into chibis and fight, and the fighting is pretty well directed, and it looks better than you would expect because they used such a simplistic art style, and it made it so they could really put everything into animating the fights. But the story of the show was unbelievably stupid. And I mean, it was like knowingly stupid. It was very tongue-in-cheek about it. But then it also started trying to have like a dramatic element. Like, it's one of those that was like bouncing between comedy and drama, but in a way where it was like, how can you possibly get dramatic with these characters who are all just weird, wacky, insane people that have, like, you know, that don't even obey the laws of physics or the fourth wall at all, you know? Like, how do you be dramatic with characters who can break the fourth wall? Doesn't make much sense. But mostly it was just dumb, and I thought it was, like, cute to an extent, but it was like, not enough to make me want to finish the show. It was more tolerable than Dungeon, but, yeah, not good enough to finish. So that's 2 shows. Let's try another one. Alright, so next up I'm going to try to watch The Seven Deadly Sins, or Nanatsu no Taizai. This is another one I've heard really mixed things about. There's lots of people who recommend this show, lots of people who really like this show, others who say that it's either shit or that it becomes shit. Mother's Basement was watching the show, and he was telling me, like, hey man, you should check this show out, I think it might be an A1 show that you like, until he finished it, and he was like, never mind, it went totally downhill at the end and turned to shit. And I was like, yeah, that's the A1 curse, all their shows turn to shit by the time they're over. I'm pretty sure this show is directed by Tensai Okamura, who was the director of Darker Than Black, and some other stuff that I kind of like. He's an okay director. And I know it's like one of the more popular shonen things of the last few years, so, you know, as much as I despise A1 Pictures, whatever, it looks like it could be okay. It's got a different aesthetic from most of their shows. It's a little bit more, you know, faithful to what the manga looks like, I guess. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. Well, my first impression of the show is that it's pretty fun. Goddamn, that's loud. The pig character had the most adorable voice ever. The silver-haired girl is beautiful. And the main character guy, I like that he's insanely overpowered. He's like the strongest guy in the whole world, and I'm curious how they'll go about making that interesting, or what kind of stuff he will do as this insanely overpowered guy. The aesthetic is okay. I can't say I'm super into it, but like, it's got some nice backgrounds, and there's like a fun, sort of colorful setting. But I guess what will keep me interested is whether or not there's like more interesting ideas than just an adventure with a bunch of wacky fun characters. We'll see. I took a long break to take a nap and eat some food and shit, and I forgot to mention, like, I recorded the last segment during the end credits of the first episode, but there was like a long post-credits scene, and I gotta say that when I found out that the main character runs a bar that is on top of a giant green pig that walks the earth and, like, puts itself down as, like, a hill. That is awesome. I am so down for that concept that I'm ready to keep watching for that alone. It's great. I will say, though, that my biggest problem with this show so far is that it also does that boob clothes thing that I was complaining about in Dungeon. Looks stupid, but at least the girls are prettier. So episode 2 felt mostly kind of pointless. It was very much one of those, like, stop on the way, shonen adventure type little stories. Though, you know, it ties into some stuff, but it was mostly just like a kind of dumb little B-plot type thing. I really like the design of Princess Elizabeth so much, and just her and the pig are so adorable that, like, I kind of feel like I could watch for them for at least a while. Meliodas, I wish, had a little more personality other than just being a badass, but, or, you know, like a badass, but with a aloof attitude. You know, it's a character archetype I don't mind, but he doesn't have as much personality as, like, a Luffy or something, or another character like that. But what I do really appreciate so far is the level of the feats that the characters do in this show. Because, like, in episode 1, like, the first opponent that Meliodas fought was, like, this giant knight guy who, like, chopped down a whole fucking forest with one swing of his sword, and then, you know, when Meliodas beat him, it was like this giant explosion of dust. And then in episode 2, this, like, knight dude, like, just chucks a fucking spear, like, for miles. And Meliodas catches it. It drags him through, like, 4 whole buildings, and he redirects it back. So I like that it's so over the top right from the start, and it leaves me wondering, like, how can it top itself like that? Like, you know, the baseline characters are so strong that it's like, how do you even go up from there? Can you? So I'm curious about that. But if too much of it is just those stop-on-the-way stories like episode 2, then it might end up being one where I'm like, let's just read the manga, because the show doesn't look bad, but it doesn't look amazing in like a way that makes me feel like I need to see it animated, So, I feel like if I could read the manga and just blast through all those minor chapters, then it might be easier to, get into the actual story. Episode 3 was kind of weak. They introduced the giant girl, who, oddly enough, voiced by Yuki Aoi. I seem to be on a weird train of Yuki Aoi shows. But, like, her personality so far, the only trait that she has is that she's apparently in love with Meliodas. So why didn't she track him down over the last 10 years? What the hell has she been doing, if not looking for him? Why was it so... Like, he's looking for her, she is in love with him. Why didn't either of them manage to meet in the last 10 years? Seems rather odd. And... Hold on, there's a post-credits scene. Anyway, so at one point in this episode, the giant girl and Meliodas both get trapped by lightning. They're like put into this bind of lightning, and the guy who put them in that shows up, and they're having their whole standoff thing. They're back and forth, and it's kind of indicated that giant girl can't break out of the lightning. She's like trying, but then the two of them both do. At, like, just whenever it's convenient for the conversation to end, they both bust out, and they start fighting, or, Meliodas fights the guy. And I was just like, why didn't they bust out at any point? It looked like they couldn't, but they could. They just did it for dramatic timing, I guess. And then, like, there was this really floaty battle between Meliodas and the night guy, like, had very little impact, and it no dramatic purpose, really, because the way it ended didn't change anything too important. I guess the idea was that Meliodas was just faking being an equal match so that he could get slashed at the end. It's pretty obvious that he didn't really get hurt, because it's like, he's obviously way stronger than this guy, so he's probably faking it, which in the post-credits scene turns out to be the case. He just faked getting hit so that he could get the knight to tell him where the other 7 deadly, or whatever information he had on the other 7 deadly sins, and then he just gets up. I don't even really know if the knight had actually fallen for it. It was not even clear. It just seemed like, the main character is just dicking around for dramatic effect in a way that doesn't feel, it doesn't feel right. Like, there has to be, I feel like for something like that, we need some kind of clear reason. Like, when they broke out of the electricity, at that point, they weren't waiting for any information. There was no, like, reason they couldn't have just broken the bonds immediately. They all just kind of stood there, and then they just did at one point. And it was like, why did they stand there doing that all that time? What's the point of that? So it just felt cheesy and weak. And overall, the whole episode didn't have much going for it. Not a lot of interesting stuff happened, and the location was really boring. And it really got me feeling like watching this show just makes me want to go watch a better shonen adventure show, like to go watch like a One Piece or something like a fantasy show, or even just to watch like Shingeki no Bahamut. Like, it kind of has that like vibe of Western fantasy. It makes me just want to watch that show, because the first 4 episodes of that show are incredible and the best in this genre. So yeah, well, anyway, I'm gonna watch one more, and if I'm still not into it, I'll probably stop here. Maybe consider picking up the manga someday, but, I don't feel like sitting through 26 episodes if it's not really gonna be that exciting. Yeah, after episode 4, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and drop this show, and maybe consider reading the manga. I don't really care about the characters enough, or the world enough, to feel, like, invested in this adventure. The villains tend to be very one-dimensional, bad guy knights, whose goal just seems to be conquer shit and, like, gain power. And, like, Meliodas is kind of annoying as a main character because of the fact that it's always like him being put out of commission until the moment when he reveals that he's not. In the last episode, he got slashed. Then he pretended he was faking it at the end. Then in this episode, it turns out that he really did get hurt, and he falls over. And then they take him to a doctor, and the doctor poisons him, and the doctor's like, oh, he's definitely dead, because I poisoned the shit out of him. So the episode once again ends on him laying there, supposedly dead, but he's obviously not going to be dead. So now we're just going to have him probably spring up all over again. I'm actually looking at the video just froze in the middle, but I can tell by the time bar that there is another post-credit scene, but it's just kind of going in circles with this plot. The giant girl is not that interesting. Like, her particular hang-up is exactly what I thought it was going to be, which is that she's really big and people don't treat her like a normal person. It's exactly what I thought a giant character's hang-up was going to be. But her personality, besides that, isn't, like, that interesting or fun to watch. She's just really in love with the main guy. It just doesn't feel like the show's going to go anywhere particularly interesting anytime soon. Like, I'm sure there'll be a lot of cool twists as it goes, because that's how these stories tend to go, but, like, I'd rather read it in a much quicker format. Just get to the point, rather than, watch it play out very slowly across all these 22-minute episodes. Alright, so the next thing I'll be checking out is Akatsuki no Yona. This is one that I believe came out towards the end of 2014 is when it started, and it ran into 2015. This is a show that, when it came out, I think I was just watching like the first episodes of a bunch of shows with my friends. It was fall 2014, and we were all just sitting around like hitting a bunch of first episodes, and the first episode of this show, we all kind of had the impression that this was going to be like some kind of Fushigi Yugi-esque, like just shoujo, where there's a girl in a fantasy world, and she's surrounded by pretty boys, and it seemed like it would be more of a fantasy comedy. And so we didn't end up finishing the first episode just because we were bored and flipping through shows. But then I later heard that it's more in the tradition of these, like, epic shoujo fantasies, such as Basara or Red River from the 90s, which spawned, like, a whole genre. This sort of weird genre of character-driven epic shoujo fantasies, where it's always, like, a main female character, usually with red hair, who starts off kind of weak but strong-willed and is trying to become like a leader over the course of the series. You've got the 12 Kingdoms with red hair. You've got Shirayuki Hime, which aired last year, and the second season this year with red hair. Akatsuki no Yona with red hair. What was that one? And Yet the World is Still Beautiful with red hair. It's weirdly specific, this genre, but it's usually like a girl who's kind of striking and different looking. Back with Basara, she had blonde hair, I believe, but this was the 90s, so we had to have red to, make it to the next level. But yeah, these, like, epic shoujo fantasy stories have become somewhat of a genre, and I'd love to see someone put together, like, some giant comparison of all of these, and, depending on if I end up enjoying Akatsuki no Yona, maybe that person could be me, because I do like Shirayuki Hime. I've always wanted to try and give 12 Kingdoms another shot, because I did not like it back in the 2000s, but I also just didn't like, that kind of heavily narrative-driven show back then, so I could definitely see giving it another chance now, because I've always heard it's great, and maybe give more of a shot to Basara. I've only seen the first episode of the OVA, but I know that maybe it was a TV show. There was an adaptation of Basara into anime in the 90s, but it doesn't cover nearly the whole thing because it's a pretty long manga. So yeah, someone needs to give a shout out to all these epic shoujo fantasies. I'm guessing that this one won't be as dark as some of the others. Like the ones from the 90s were like Game of Thrones level violent and like fucking fucked up. Like I read a few volumes of Red River way back, and that shit was brutal. I don't know if we're gonna get something of that level in Akatsuki no Yona, but I'll definitely give it a shot and let you know what I think. Well, the first episode was essentially a very long build-up to the fact that the show has a plot. It was mostly about establishing Yona as this sort of spoiled, bratty princess who's in love with this guy, who of course the guy turns out to be evil at the end of the episode. They definitely brought out the violence at the end there. Not presented in a particularly grim way, though. It's more like brief badass violence in a way. Like, I don't get this feeling that this show's gonna be like super gritty and dark, but it will have, you know, people die when they need to die kind of thing. I don't know, there's not much to say about it yet because it spent so long just building up to like the reveal of what it's about, so I really feel like I have to see a few episodes before I can comment. So, after episode 2, I think my biggest issue with this show is that there's not much really to set it apart from other shows of its nature, from other, like, fantasy, you know, princess has to become strong type shows. There's not, like, a strong element to the world. It just kind of seems like a generic fantasy world so far. Though that could change, because so far it's just been very slowly going through this sort of backstory. Can't say I'm too invested in any of the characters yet. Like, it's obvious that Yona is going to undergo a development where she's going to become a stronger person, but in terms of, like, actually having a personality, there's not a lot there. And, like, the visual direction is really weak. The fight scenes look terrible, not very entertaining to watch. There's no real direction to them. It's just kind of guys flailing sticks around and knocking each other through the air. It's one of those where, as well, it's because it's not done very carefully, it feels inconsistent. Like, at the end of episode 1, Hawk jumped into the fray and knocked like 6 dudes out with one swing. Like, he just jumped in and it fucking destroyed all these dudes. But then, towards the end of episode 2, they're trying to escape the castle, and there's like 6 or 7 guards at the gate, and they're like, oh, arrow shooting guy, here, he's gonna be a distraction, and go run off dressed as the girl so they can go through the front gate. And I'm like, why do they need the distraction? Hawk could have just jumped in there and fucking destroyed all those guys, you know? It's like, it's hard to ever feel that the sense of danger is warranted when we already have seen this guy, like, do unbelievable feats, you know? Like, there's one part where the arrow guy's like, Hawk, behind you, because there's, like, a soldier running up behind him, and it's like, just minutes earlier, we saw a soldier run up behind him, and him just kind of, like, sense him and knock him flat on his ass. So, you know, it's got that kind of inconsistency in its action, and again, all the action is just, like, strong dudes blowing away waves of weaker dudes. And with no real direction to it. And the overall aesthetic of the show feels very manga panel. You know, it'll just be, like, a shot of a character talking, another shot of a character talking, like, in these very panel-like ways. So, it, you know, I don't know if it's, like, an extremely straightforward adaptation of the manga, but that's what it feels like. I will say I liked at the end of episode 2 that it had this sort of, I don't know if it was a flash forward or if this is where the story really begins and all of this has just been like a memory of what happened to start the story. But, you know, it's nice to get a glimpse of her as like this, already as the strong-willed leader of this band of, you know, these 5 generals who they've been hinting at were going to be the characters. But, you know, all it really showed was them just killing a bunch of guys, so I don't really know what they're going to be doing. I'll definitely give it another episode or 2 before, you know, deciding how I really completely feel about it. So far, though, it just leaves me wanting to go finish Shiryuki Hime Season 2, since I haven't started Season 2 of that yet, and I really loved Season 1 of that show. Or watch another epic fantasy like Basara, or like the 12 Kingdoms or something. So episode 3 was mostly about just re-emphasizing the stuff that we already basically knew from the first 2 episodes. Like, that the main characters were all good friends growing up. It just kind of was going over the stuff we already knew about their relationships. I guess just to strengthen it, make the emotions stronger. Personally, I just want to move on, because I already got the way the characters' relationships were. I got the point. I'd like to, learn where they're going from here. Maybe some more about what the motivations of killing the king were, or what they're gonna do now with the kingdom, where they're gonna go. Just 3 episodes is a lot for re-emphasizing the exact same points over and over again. But, yeah, I'm not ready to drop it yet or anything. I just would like to see it get moving, because so far I'm not that interested, and I could be watching something else. By the way, just wanted to extend a quick fuck you to Marie Callender, because these pot pies are too fucking hot. I burned my mouth. I burned every part of my mouth. I've been trying to eat this thing for 25 fucking minutes and it's still too hot. Alright, well, episode 4 finally picked up a little, establishing some of the political climate of what's going on in this world. There's all these element-based clans. Of course, the Fire Clan's the bad guys, because you know what happens when the Fire Nation attacks. But, they kind of established more of the people who are being affected by this conflict. Though I had 2 realizations while watching this episode about what I need from this show. Well, really 1. There's one thing I need, and that's an ideological conflict. Because so far the only reason we've been given for why the bad guy killed the king is that he thinks the king killed his father. So it's mostly a revenge killing. Now, there is some semblance of ideological difference, because the bad guy, his father was more of a warring type, and he always wanted to go into battle with his father, and he thinks that the country's been made weak by having such a weak ruler, even though his dad approved of his brother, the weaker king, being in charge. So there is an element of an ideological battle in there, of people who want to live in a peaceful nation versus people who want to live in a warring nation. Obviously, the Wind Tribe are more peaceful, the Fire Tribe are more warring, and they're butting heads. Now, in this episode, it came close, and I wouldn't be surprised if this happens anyways, though I'm not really sure still what kind of show this is. It came close to being that the Wind Tribe was going to go to bat with the Fire Tribe and, say, fuck you, we think you were responsible for the king's death. But instead, Hawk, the leader of the Wind Tribe, decides to make himself the bad guy, be the Batman, be the Kirito, and take the blame, the implied blame for killing the king, so that the tribes won't have to go to war, and they can all stay together, at least for the time being, and he'll go on the run, leaving the princess, he hopes, with the Wind Clan, which is obviously not going to happen because she's the main character, so she's not going to sit around in the Wind Clan. So the question is, will this come down to a battle of ideologies? Will they say, we don't approve of this new king's methods, of this new king's way, and we're going to go into battle anyways? It's hard to say for now. I'm still not sure if this is more of a political story or an ideological story, or if it's more of just the emotional side, because it definitely focuses more on the emotional take of the events. You know, it's more about the characters' relationships to one another and how they feel very strongly about one another. And it occurred to me that if it's not a very ideological battle, if it doesn't come down to that, then there's a huge, I'll call it a risk here. Let's say it's something I hope doesn't happen. And I know this show's incomplete, so this probably wouldn't happen within the span of the show anyways. Maybe in the manga. I don't know. I don't think it's over yet. But there's a huge fear I have that because of the fact that this whole thing is probably predicated on a misunderstanding. Because the bad guy probably thought the king killed his dad, but is probably wrong. And if he turns out to be wrong, because it's continually suggesting that he says that he was lying about being friends with Yona and Hawk. He keeps saying that, you know, oh, that was all just a lie. I was always I've been premeditating this murder of her father for all these years, you know, and but then it'll keep suggesting that he's full of shit, that he did enjoy the time they spent together, that he was in love with Yona, that, you know, he feels terrible about the fact that the Wind Tribe, Hawk's granddad, you know, thought of him as a grandson, and he really, like, appreciates that in spite of what he's gonna have to fuck him over. And what all of this leads me to is the fear that he'll come around in the end. That it'll all, once he realizes it's all a misunderstanding, then because there's other people who are more bad guy-ish, you know, he's got his right-hand man retainer guy who's like the serpenty evil dude, you know, you've got the Fire Nation who are obviously lust for power guys who are obviously bad. So my biggest fear would be that those guys become the real bad guys. The bad guy makes up with his friends and fights with them right at the end in the final battle. Now, he might die anyways. He might get redeemed and then die. I just think it would be so obvious to go down this road, like, you know, of his redemption. And it would be, I guess the only reason it would really make me mad is that I've just predicted it. So, I mean, this is just me spitballing ideas. I have no idea if any of this happens, but it would make me so mad. And the only reason that I think it could happen is just because, like I said, so much of this show is about the emotional take on events, the way that characters feel about one another and feel about what's happening, you know, where they really did make it out like the revenge over his father was more the reason that he killed the king than a difference in how they want to run the country. So that's why I'm worried that he could end up with a redemption arc, because he's not necessarily holding strong to these ideals of wanting to be a warfaring country, you know, even though that is a part of it. But, only time will tell. I'm not sick of this show just yet. The last episode kind of gave me a little bit of a Full Metal Alchemist vibe, where it had this, like, drama with characters who could still be funny, but without, like, being over-the-top goofy, you know, like, the characters have fun and can be, like, the Wind Tribe are all these, like, very lighthearted people, but obviously, you know, will go to bat for what they want to protect. It just very much gave me that, that careful balance between drama and humor type vibe that FMA did very well. So, anyway, I'll keep watching. After episode 5, I gotta say, the action scenes in this show make it very difficult to take seriously. Like, I know I was just saying it's cool how it can be kind of funny at times and kind of dramatic at times, but, like, an action scene will start up, and Hawk will take this big-ass spear and just swat waves and waves of soldiers. Just swat them away. Pole vault with a spear up a cliffside, all while, like, you know, flirting little quips with Yona and shit, and just, like, demolishing this army. And the only time that he gets hurt is when it's for dramatic effect. Like, someone's like, target the princess, so of course he has to jump in front of an arrow and take the arrow for the princess, even though, like, we literally saw him seconds ago just wiping arrows from the air. Waves and waves of arrows, just wiping them from the air with his staff, you know, from behind. So, it's like, yeah, like, the battles are mindless. They mean nothing until the moment when, you know, something dramatic has to happen. It's just like a bunch of fucking dumb, worthless fight, and then, like, snap, something important's happening now, you know, so now there's a dramatic stake to it, even though up until that point it's just bullshit. Yeah, it's by far the hardest thing about this show to watch, is that the action is, like, so bad, and the show is also just kind of corny. It really plays up, like, you know, like, the Hawk's a pretty boy, and he's flirting with her and stuff, you know, it'll give those little nods every so often. They're just kind of like, alright, I got it. Yeah, anyway, the next episode's starting. Well, alright, at this point I'm pretty bored. This show moves at a glacial pace, and again, it just keeps reinforcing the same stuff we already know. Once again, it's going back and explaining how close the three main characters were, and just how much it sucks that that the situation has gotten so bad, and it's like, I know someday that Yona's gonna be a strong protagonist, but man, that day is waiting to come, cause it's taking its sweet fucking time. And honestly, it's at the point where it's like, if I care enough about this story, I could just read the manga, because I can't handle this pacing. It's just episode after episode of reiterating the same points, just trying to raise the emotional stakes of what we already understand, as opposed to adding more complexity to the situation. It's like this whole will they, won't they about the tribes infighting or going to war or whatever, and it's like... But what Yona's doing now, like, her and Hawk just fell into a valley, so now everyone thinks they're dead, so there's not going to be anyone immediately chasing them for a while, which means probably a few episodes of them trying to figure out what to do, and her starting to train to become a better, fighter and everything, or survivalist, and then they're going to team up with these new pretty boys and eventually devise some kind of plan, and I'm just like, I don't want to wait around for all of that to happen. It's just a little bit too slow for me. And in that particular episode, it was funny because it really felt like they were ramping up the pretty boy quotient and also the shipping quotient, like really pushing that like some ship bait with Hawk and the bad guy, and then ship bait with these two new guys they've introduced. And I mean, it's pretty obvious from the start that, like, there's one girl in this show. Like, there's a lot of guys in this show, and there's one girl. And there just keeps being more pretty boys and more, I don't want to use the word pandering, but it certainly feels like it's going in that direction, so... which, doesn't do anything for me personally. Not to knock it as a concept. If it was the same thing with a bunch of pretty girls, maybe I'd be into it. But yeah, just the pace of this show is too fucking slow, and I don't really care that much about the characters. Like, again, I don't think Yona has any personality. Like, I feel like this show is so into the idea of having the characters develop, of having them change over time, reinforcing the emotions that the bad guy's going through, and reinforcing Hawk's emotions, and reinforcing Yona transforming as a person, but none of them are interesting people. They're not characters that I feel like I want to see go through all this evolution. I feel like that I could have been hooked a lot more easily just by having a character who was already interesting, and not one who I'm gonna have to watch, like, train for 18 fucking episodes, and then she's gonna be a strong protagonist, which is, I mean, a lot of protagonists start off strong, so it's not doing much for me there. I mean, if you looked at, like, Shiroyuki Hime, like, a big part of the appeal of that show was that the main girl was already so strong-willed from the beginning, and she was an interesting character, and her dynamic with the prince in that show is what made it so watchable, in spite of also being very slow. But, like, there was a lot more chemistry between the characters, a lot more good dialogue that wasn't just characters stating how they feel about each situation as opposed to acting on those feelings in every situation, you know? The show always feels like it's just constantly telling me how everything makes the characters feel. But I don't feel any of it because, again, there's rarely any real drama to what's going on, because it's like, well, we know the princess and Hawk aren't gonna die anytime soon. They haven't even met the other characters that were in the fucking opening scenes. Why do we have 15 minutes of action scenes when we know these characters aren't in any trouble? So, I don't know, the priorities just seem out of order, and it's just not as interesting as some other shows I could be watching in the same genre. Anyway, that about wraps up tonight's journey through 2015 and 2014 anime that I never got around to before. Danmachi was easily the worst one. That one, after those 2 episodes, I will never touch that show again. I could easily see, like, Nanatsu no Taizai and Akatsuki no Yona, neither one is a bad show, and, like, I could see finishing them if I was if I was with a friend who wanted to watch the whole show and we just sat down and marathoned it. I could see finishing either one, but neither one seems like it would be a favorite of mine or anything like that. You know, they both seem like okay shows that aren't bad, and maybe I'd even read the manga just because it would be easier to go through. But there's so many other shows that have priority for me, like, that are in the same genres. Like I said with Nanatsu no Taizai, like, I couldn't shake the feeling like, yeah, I could just be catching up. Like, I could go read the manga, or I could go read more One Piece, you know, which I'm also not caught up on. Or I could go catch up on Berserk or something if I wanted a good fantasy. Or with Akatsuki no Yona, I could read that manga, or I could go read Basara, or I could go read something else, you know. So it doesn't feel like there's much incentive to continue and finish those 2 shows. So that's it. See you in the next one.